What if the most powerful weapon on Earth wasn't a missile or an army, but a simple piece of paper folded twice?
Everyone always assumes the dollar rules the entire world simply because America has the biggest economy and the strongest military force ever.
That explanation feels obvious enough on the surface, at first glance. It's also, honestly, only a small part of the real story. The real story involves a secret meeting, a broken gold promise, and a very unusual, quiet deal with a powerful oil kingdom.
90% of all global oil trades still happen in dollars, even when America isn't buying or selling anything at all today. Nearly 57% of every single central bank's reserves on this entire planet still sit quietly parked away in US dollars. That's trillions and trillions of dollars, held by countries that sometimes don't even particularly really like America's government very much at all.
So how exactly did one single country's currency quietly and truly become the entire world's default money, decade after decade after decade?
The answer actually starts almost a full century ago now, inside a small, quiet hotel tucked into some distant, snow-covered mountains.
But before we get there, we first need to fully understand who actually ran the entire world's money before America ever did. Think of the dollar less as a simple currency, and much more as the world's single most successful export product ever made.
Every country on Earth still needs dollars to trade oil, to trade grain, and to trade almost anything else internationally, even today. So the entire world constantly demands more and more dollars, no matter what America's own domestic economy happens to be doing internally. Back in the 1960s, one French finance minister actually gave this exact advantage of America's a very specific official name: exorbitant privilege. No other country anywhere on Earth gets to settle its global debts using money it simply manufactures inside its own borders today. Imagine quietly paying off your entire monthly credit card bill using paper money you personally printed yourself in your own home garage. That's really not an exaggeration at all. That's essentially the actual literal mechanical privilege America has quietly held for many decades now.
Exorbitant privilege simply means America can pay off its foreign debts using a currency that it can literally print itself whenever needed.
This one single privilege lets America borrow money more cheaply than literally any other country anywhere on the entire planet today. Still, once you finally start seeing the dollar as a genuine privilege, and not just a simple currency, everything else starts making sense.
Rewind now to the entire 1800s, and even well into the early 1900s, when Britain quietly ran the entire world's money system. The British pound sterling was the dollar of its entire era, backed firmly by gold, and by a truly massive global trading empire. London's banks financed a huge share of global trade, and countries everywhere kept their reserves quietly stored in pounds sterling, not dollars.
Then came the First World War, and Britain was forced to spend an enormous fortune it genuinely did not actually have.
Britain borrowed heavily from the United States just to keep fighting, and that single debt quietly began shifting global financial power westward.
By the time the Second World War actually ended, Britain's economy was genuinely shattered, while America's economy stood almost completely untouched physically.
No bombs had ever fallen on American soil directly, while its factories kept running at full capacity throughout the entire war effort.
By 1945, America alone was producing roughly half of the entire world's total economic output, an almost unimaginable single share of everything. America also happened to be holding roughly 2/3 of the entire world's official gold reserves, sitting quietly and safely underground somewhere.
With the world in complete ruins, and America holding all the money and all the gold, a new global order became genuinely necessary. In July of 1944, delegates from 44 different countries quietly gathered together at a resort hotel in New Hampshire, America.
The hotel itself was called the Mount Washington Hotel, tucked quietly into a small town named Bretton Woods, in the mountains.
Their entire shared goal was simple: build a stable global monetary system that could genuinely prevent yet another economic collapse. The final agreement they reached was elegantly simple on paper. Every currency would be pegged directly to the US dollar itself, and the dollar itself, in turn, would be firmly pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. This created a clean, two-layer system. Currencies trusted the dollar completely, and the dollar itself was firmly trusted to equal real gold.
Any country, at literally any moment, could technically walk up and formally exchange its own dollars directly for actual physical gold.
That single guarantee is exactly what made the entire world genuinely comfortable holding so many US dollars in their own reserves.
The Bretton Woods Agreement also quietly created two brand new institutions: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank itself.
Both institutions were headquartered in Washington, and both were designed, quite deliberately, around the US dollar as their absolute foundation. With the new system officially in place, Europe now desperately needed money to rebuild entire cities that had been completely flattened. In 1948, America launched the Marshall Plan, sending roughly $13 billion in aid across the entire war-torn European continent. That aid money, though, came with one very specific and quiet condition, attached tightly to every single dollar being sent over.
European countries had to actually use those dollars to purchase American goods, machinery, and equipment, not simply hoard the cash itself.
This single, clever condition rebuilt Europe's shattered economy, while simultaneously flooding the entire European continent with newly needed American dollars. Suddenly, dollars weren't just something governments held quietly in vaults. Ordinary businesses everywhere needed dollars simply to buy anything at all.
That everyday, practical demand is exactly what economists mean when they casually talk about genuine dollar liquidity spreading throughout the entire globe.
Meanwhile, Japan was undergoing an almost identical rebuilding process, backed heavily by American investment, American aid, and steady American military presence.
By the 1950s, the entire non-communist world was functioning almost completely on dollars, dollar credit, and dollar-based international trade agreements.
For nearly 2 decades, this entire system worked beautifully. But underneath the surface, one dangerous mathematical...
In 1960, an economist named Robert Triffin quietly identified a fundamental flaw hiding deep inside this entire beautiful global monetary system.
To supply the entire world with enough dollars for trade, America had to constantly run trade deficits, sending more dollars out than in. But every dollar sent abroad was still technically a promise, redeemable for real gold, sitting quietly in a vault back home.
This became Triffin's famous dilemma: supply the world with enough dollars, or keep those same dollars fully and safely backed by gold.
Eventually, quite simply, you genuinely cannot do both of these two things at once, forever, without something somewhere eventually breaking down.
By the late 1960s, there were far more dollars circulating out in the world than there was actual gold sitting in Fort Knox.
Some countries, especially France, grew genuinely suspicious and quietly began demanding to swap their own dollar reserves directly for real physical gold.
France even reportedly sent a naval warship across the Atlantic Ocean, specifically just to physically carry its own gold back home safely. Other countries quietly noticed this happening, and they too began lining up, worried the gold might genuinely start running out completely soon.
By 1971, America's own gold reserves had shrunk dramatically, and the entire fixed system was now genuinely, visibly, close to collapsing.
On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television and announced something that genuinely shocked the entire watching world. He announced that America would immediately stop allowing dollars to be exchanged directly for gold, closing what people called the gold window.
This single moment is remembered today, quite simply, as the Nixon shock, and it fundamentally changed all of global finance forever.
Overnight, the dollar was no longer backed by any gold whatsoever. It was now backed by essentially nothing physical at all, anywhere. Naturally, the entire world panicked, at least briefly. If the dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore, why would anyone still actually want it? That exact question, believe it or not, is the single most important question in this entire 50-year story we're telling you. America desperately needed a brand new reason for the entire rest of the world to keep wanting, holding, and actively using its dollars. Without gold backing it up anymore, the dollar needed a brand new anchor, something the whole world would always need constantly. The answer to that exact problem was found sitting quietly underground, in vast oil fields, deep beneath the deserts of the Middle East.
In 1974, US officials quietly traveled to Saudi Arabia and sat down for a series of extremely secretive, carefully guarded, closed-door meetings. The proposed deal itself was actually remarkably simple. Saudi Arabia would sell every single barrel of its oil exclusively priced in US dollars. In exchange, America quietly promised military protection, advanced weapons sales, and unwavering political support for the Saudi royal family's continued rule. This quiet arrangement became widely known, informally, as the petrodollar system, linking American security guarantees directly to Saudi oil pricing. Soon after, the rest of OPEC, the wider oil cartel, quietly followed Saudi Arabia's lead and adopted the exact same dollar pricing.
Suddenly, every country on the entire planet that needed oil, which was genuinely every single country, now also needed plenty of dollars.
This single deal replaced gold with something arguably even stronger: literal global demand for oil itself, which never really goes away. As long as the entire world kept needing oil, and oil stayed priced strictly in dollars, dollar demand was now essentially permanently guaranteed.
Gold is heavy, and it's finite. Oil demand, meanwhile, was renewable, constant, and effectively baked directly into the entire global economy's structure. In many genuine ways, this quiet 1974 handshake mattered even more to history than the actual Bretton Woods Agreement itself ever did.
So what actually happened to all those enormous piles of oil money that Saudi Arabia and OPEC were suddenly earning from selling oil?
A huge share of it flowed straight back into American banks, and directly into safe, reliable United States government Treasury bonds instead. This entire circular process eventually earned a specific nickname among economists, petrodollar recycling, since the exact same dollars kept flowing right back home.
America essentially got to spend that oil money twice. Once when it originally paid for the oil, and again when it borrowed it back. Meanwhile, Wall Street banks in New York became the primary global destination for parking, managing, and quietly investing all that new oil wealth. This gave American financial markets an enormous, steady, and remarkably reliable new source of investable capital, flowing in from halfway around the world. It also gave Middle Eastern oil producers a genuinely safe, stable, and highly liquid place to actually store their newfound national wealth.
Both sides genuinely benefited enormously from this quiet arrangement, which is exactly why the entire system managed to hold together for decades. But this entire recycling system also meant something else, quietly. America's own financial markets became increasingly dependent on constant foreign capital inflows, a dependency that, decades later, would eventually connect quietly to America's own enormous and ever-growing national government debt problem today. For the dollar system to genuinely work at global scale, banks everywhere needed a fast, reliable way to actually move money internationally.
In 1973, banks from 15 different countries quietly created a shared messaging network called SWIFT to solve this exact global problem.
SWIFT itself doesn't actually move any real money directly. It simply sends secure messages telling banks exactly how to move it themselves.
Today, over 11,000 banks and financial institutions across more than 200 countries rely completely on this single shared messaging system. Most of these international payments, even between two completely non-American countries, still ultimately get settled quietly through American dollar-based banking channels.
That means, in effect, that almost every major international transaction quietly touches America's own financial system at some single point along the way. This gives American regulators an enormous, quiet amount of visibility into who exactly is sending money to whom, all across the entire world. You can technically build your own smaller local roads elsewhere, but almost every major destination on Earth still requires using this one main highway. Think of SWIFT and the dollar system together as the actual physical highway that almost all of global trade quietly travels along daily.
This network effect, this simple accumulated convenience, is one of the strongest, quietest forces holding the entire global dollar system firmly together.
Here's something genuinely strange most people never actually realize. Trillions of literal US dollars exist and circulate entirely outside of America itself. This entire hidden system is genuinely called the euro-dollar market, and, confusingly enough, it actually has absolutely nothing to do with the euro. It actually started back in the 1950s, when the Soviet Union wanted to hold dollars, but was genuinely afraid of American banks freezing them. So they simply deposited their dollars into banks located in London instead, entirely outside of direct American legal jurisdiction and reach.
Banks quickly realized they could freely lend and borrow these offshore dollars amongst themselves, completely outside of normal US banking regulations entirely.
This offshore euro-dollar market exploded steadily in size, and today it's estimated to hold many trillions of dollars, completely outside direct US oversight.
This creates a genuinely strange paradox. The dollar's global power actually grows stronger the more it operates freely outside America's own direct control. Banks in London, in Tokyo, in Singapore, and in Hong Kong now all actively lend dollars to each other, every single day, constantly. None of this activity technically even requires America's central bank to get directly involved, and yet it still fundamentally strengthens dollar dominance regardless. The dollar essentially became a genuinely global public good, used and traded freely by people who may never even visit America at all. Let's fast forward now to today and actually look closely at exactly how dominant the dollar genuinely remains in modern global trade. Roughly half of all global trade invoices, even between two completely non-American trading countries, are still priced and billed entirely in dollars.
The dollar is involved in roughly 88% of all foreign currency trading transactions happening anywhere across the entire global financial system today.
That number is genuinely staggering when you actually stop and remember that America itself only represents roughly a quarter of total global economic output.
That gap between America's actual economic size and the dollar's genuine global usage is precisely where all of the dollar's real power lives.
Even oil-producing countries that are openly hostile toward America's government still typically price their own oil exports strictly in American dollars regardless. Airplanes worldwide are still priced and purchased almost entirely in dollars, regardless of which specific country actually manufactures or ultimately buys the aircraft. Global commodities like wheat, copper, coffee, and gold itself are all still overwhelmingly priced and traded internationally using American dollars as well. This deep, structural dollar dependency is exactly why so many governments still watch America's own domestic interest rate decisions incredibly closely today.
So where exactly does all of that constant global dollar demand actually go once countries genuinely finish collecting it from years of trade?
A massive share of it flows directly into U.S. Treasury bonds, which are essentially just simple IOUs issued by the American government itself. These bonds are widely considered the single safest financial asset on the entire planet, backed fully by America's own full taxing power. Central banks all around the world buy these bonds specifically because they're extremely liquid, meaning they can be sold again almost instantly, anytime. The U.S. Treasury market alone is genuinely worth many tens of trillions of dollars, making it the deepest, most liquid market anywhere on Earth. No other country's bond market comes anywhere genuinely close in size, depth, or reliability, which makes treasuries the default global choice by default. This creates a fascinating, almost circular loop. Global trade generates dollars, and those dollars then quietly finance America's own government spending needs.
Essentially, the entire rest of the world has been quietly lending America enormous amounts of money for decades at genuinely very low interest rates.
That steady, reliable stream of cheap foreign lending is exactly what has allowed America's own national government debt to grow so dramatically large.
So exactly, who are these foreign countries that are quietly lending America so much money? Let's actually take a genuinely closer look now.
Foreign governments and institutions collectively hold trillions and trillions of dollars worth of American government debt, spread out across dozens of different countries. Japan has traditionally held the single largest foreign share of American debt, holding well over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds alone.
China holds an enormous share too, even while the two countries remain locked in an ongoing, very public, and very tense trade rivalry. That's genuinely one of the strangest parts of this entire story. Geopolitical rivals still remain deeply financially intertwined through American government debt itself. The United Kingdom, Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands, Belgium, and Switzerland also all hold genuinely massive shares of American government debt as well, quietly. Why would China, specifically, actually want to keep lending money to a country it openly competes against, quite fiercely, in almost every arena? Because China exports enormous amounts of goods to America, and it needs somewhere safe and reliable to actually park all those earned dollars. Treasury bonds remain the single safest, most convenient place to store those earnings, even between two countries that genuinely distrust one another deeply. This creates something economists sometimes genuinely call mutual financial hostage-taking. Both sides are locked together, and neither one can easily just walk away. If China suddenly sold off all its American debt at once, it would genuinely crash the very market its own wealth is sitting inside. Now let's actually look closely at America's own side of this entire equation. What does America genuinely give up in return for all this? America runs what economists genuinely call twin deficits: a large trade deficit and a large government budget deficit.
A trade deficit simply means America genuinely imports far more goods and products from abroad than it actually exports back out to the world. A budget deficit simply means the American government genuinely spends significantly more money each year than it actually collects back in total tax revenue. Most countries genuinely cannot sustain running both of these deficits for very long, because eventually nobody remains willing to keep financing that gap.
But America genuinely can sustain both deficits simultaneously, precisely because the entire world still desperately wants and needs American dollars and treasury bonds. This is genuinely the clearest, most concrete example of exorbitant privilege actually working in real, practical, everyday economic terms, right in front of us. Most countries have to genuinely earn foreign currency first, through hard exports, before they can actually afford to import anything meaningful back in return.
America, though, can simply import whatever it genuinely wants first, and pay for it later using a currency it can literally print itself. But nothing in economics is ever genuinely free forever. Every single privilege like this one eventually comes with its own hidden, quiet cost attached.
So let's now look closely at exactly how much of the world's official reserves still sit quietly parked away specifically in American dollars today.
According to the International Monetary Fund, the dollar's share of global reserves currently sits at roughly 57% as of late 2025. Back in the year 2000, the dollar's share of global reserves was actually much higher, sitting at roughly 71% of the total.
That's a genuinely real, measurable decline of about 14 full percentage points, spread out gradually across roughly 25 full years of steady change.
Second place genuinely belongs to the euro, which currently holds roughly 20% of total global reserves, a genuinely distant but persistent runner-up.
China's own currency, the renminbi, holds a genuinely surprisingly small share, sitting at under 2% of total global reserves currently.
That gap tells you something genuinely important. Economic size alone clearly doesn't automatically translate directly into becoming a trusted global.
The remaining chunk of global reserves, roughly 20%, is split quietly among many smaller currencies like the yen, pound, and Canadian dollar.
So yes, the dollar has genuinely declined somewhat over 25 years, but it still remains, by a very wide and comfortable margin, the world's leader. So if so many countries genuinely dislike relying on the dollar, why don't they simply, quietly, just walk away from the entire system?
This answer involves something economists genuinely call network effects, the exact same force that keeps everyone using the same popular social media platform.
You genuinely don't switch messaging apps just because you personally dislike the company. You stay because that's exactly where all your friends already are. The dollar system works exactly the same way. Everyone else already genuinely uses it, which makes it the single easiest, safest option available today. Switching away would genuinely require every single trading partner to simultaneously agree on a completely new shared currency, all at exactly the same time. That's an genuinely enormous coordination problem, and coordination problems like this one are notoriously difficult to actually solve at massive global scale.
There's also a genuinely simple, practical problem. No other single currency currently offers the same combination of deep liquidity, safety, and total trust.
The euro is genuinely close, but it's still fragmented across 19 different individual countries, each with their own separate, sometimes conflicting economic priorities. China's renminbi, meanwhile, remains genuinely tightly controlled by its own government, which makes many foreign investors quietly nervous about holding it long term. So, for now at least, every realistic alternative genuinely still falls noticeably short of matching what the dollar system already reliably offers the world. Here's a genuinely darker side to this entire story that most people don't actually think about when they picture the dollar system daily. Because so much global finance genuinely flows through American-controlled channels, the United States government can quietly cut specific countries off entirely, whenever it chooses. This is genuinely called financial sanctions, and the dollar system makes them remarkably, uncomfortably easy for American officials to actually enforce worldwide, quickly.
In 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, several major Russian banks were genuinely and swiftly disconnected entirely from the global SWIFT messaging network. Nearly $300 billion worth of Russia's own central bank reserves, held abroad, were also genuinely frozen almost completely overnight, instantly.
That single event genuinely sent a very loud, very clear message to every other country watching closely from the sidelines around the entire world. If you genuinely upset the United States enough, your entire country's wealth held abroad could quietly vanish, almost instantly, with a single decision. This is exactly why many countries now genuinely treat holding too many dollars as a real, tangible geopolitical risk, not simply a financial one. This exact same dollar dominance that gives America enormous economic power also genuinely gives it enormous, sometimes uncomfortable, geopolitical leverage over other nations.
It's genuinely both the dollar's single greatest strength and simultaneously its single greatest long-term vulnerability, existing together at exactly the very same time.
In direct response to this exact risk, a growing group of countries has genuinely started actively searching for practical alternatives to the dollar system. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa formed a group known as BRICS, specifically to coordinate their own shared economic and political interests. This group has since expanded to include several additional member nations, and has openly, publicly discussed creating an entirely new shared trading currency.
So far, though, that proposed shared currency genuinely remains mostly theoretical, facing exactly the same coordination problems we already discussed earlier in this video.
Some countries have instead quietly started settling certain trades directly in their own local currencies, deliberately bypassing the dollar entirely for those specific deals. India and Russia, for example, have genuinely settled some of their own oil trades using rupees and rubles, deliberately skipping the dollar completely. Central banks worldwide have also genuinely been quietly buying record amounts of physical gold again, for the very first time in many decades. This quiet return to gold buying is widely seen as a genuinely clear hedge against over-reliance on any single country's currency or financial system. China has also been quietly developing its own digital currency, called the digital yuan, hoping it might genuinely help bypass dollar-based payment systems eventually. Despite all of these genuine efforts, though, the dollar's actual overall share of global reserves has only declined slowly, gradually, not dramatically or suddenly.
So for now, de-dollarization genuinely remains a slow, gradual trend, not some sudden, dramatic collapse happening overnight all at once, everywhere.
But that doesn't genuinely mean the entire system is somehow permanently safe.
or completely immune to real structural risk, forever, without any limits.
Remember Triffin's dilemma from earlier in this video? That same fundamental tension genuinely still exists today, just wearing a slightly different modern disguise.
America's own total national debt has genuinely climbed past $36 trillion, an almost unimaginably large number for any single country to manage.
Interest payments alone on that enormous debt now genuinely cost the American government more money each year than its entire national defense budget.
If foreign countries ever genuinely lost confidence in America's ability to actually manage that enormous debt responsibly, dollar demand could quietly start shifting. Even a genuinely small, gradual shift away from the dollar could meaningfully raise America's own borrowing costs, making that enormous debt even harder to manage. This creates a genuinely uncomfortable feedback loop. More debt weakens confidence, and weaker confidence in turn quietly makes that same debt even more expensive.
Some economists genuinely worry this exact feedback loop could eventually become a serious, self-reinforcing problem if left completely unmanaged for too many years.
Others genuinely argue the dollar's advantages remain so overwhelming that this exact scenario stays purely theoretical, at least for many years still to come. Let's step back now and genuinely spell out exactly what America actually gains, in real practical terms, from holding this entire global privilege. First, America genuinely borrows money more cheaply than almost any other country, saving its own government billions of dollars in interest payments annually. Second, American consumers genuinely enjoy cheaper imported goods, since the dollar's strength lets them buy more foreign products for relatively less overall money. Third, American banks and financial firms genuinely dominate global finance, earning enormous fees simply for processing the world's money through their own systems. Fourth, the United States genuinely gains real, tangible geopolitical leverage, using sanctions and financial pressure as a genuinely powerful tool of foreign policy. Fifth, America genuinely enjoys enormous flexibility during real economic crises, since it can print dollars to respond quickly.
During the 2008 financial crisis, for example, the Federal Reserve genuinely printed trillions of new dollars without causing runaway inflation or a currency crash.
Almost any other country attempting that exact same move would genuinely risk severe currency collapse, hyperinflation, and total economic panic among its own citizens. This exact difference, this genuine special exception, is precisely what economists mean when they talk about America's unique, singular, exorbitant privilege in practice.
But every single one of these genuine benefits ultimately depends entirely on one single, fragile thing: the world's continued, ongoing trust in the dollar.
So let's actually stress test this entire dollar system against a real historical crisis, and see genuinely how it actually held up under real pressure. In 2008, a massive American housing crisis genuinely triggered the worst global financial meltdown since the Great Depression, nearly a century earlier before it. Logically, you might genuinely expect a crisis starting inside America to actually weaken the dollar significantly, as global investors quietly fled elsewhere instead. Instead, something genuinely counterintuitive happened. Investors worldwide actually rushed toward the dollar, treating it as the single safest place to hide during panic. Economists genuinely call this strange pattern a flight to safety, where global panic paradoxically strengthens the very currency that originally caused the crisis. This happens because, even during a genuine American crisis, US Treasury bonds remain the single safest asset available anywhere on the entire planet still.
It's genuinely one of the strangest structural features of this entire system. The dollar actually strengthens precisely when global fear and uncertainty rise sharply.
The Federal Reserve also genuinely stepped in during 2008, quietly lending dollars directly to foreign central banks to help prevent a total global freeze. This effectively made America's own central bank genuinely act as a lender of last resort, not just domestically, but for the entire world. So the 2008 crisis, rather than genuinely breaking the dollar system, actually ended up proving and reinforcing its remarkable resilience under real global pressure.
So let's genuinely talk about the deepest, most fundamental layer underneath this entire system: pure, simple, collective human psychology and shared global trust.
A dollar bill itself is genuinely just a small piece of printed paper. It has no real, tangible, physical value on its own at all. It holds value only because millions and millions of people worldwide genuinely, collectively agree, together, that it does, every single day, repeatedly. This is genuinely what economists mean by the term fiat, value created purely by shared belief, not by gold, oil, or any physical backing.
The moment that shared belief genuinely wavers, even slightly, the entire underlying value of the currency itself can quietly start to wobble too. This is genuinely why America's own political stability, its rule of law, and its independent courts matter just as much as raw economic size.
Investors worldwide genuinely need to believe that American courts, American contracts, and American institutions will actually function predictably, fairly, and reliably, year after year.
Any genuine sign of serious political instability, chaos, or institutional weakness inside America can quietly This is genuinely why so many economists watch America's own internal politics almost as closely as they watch its actual economic data and numbers.
Trust, it genuinely turns out, is the real currency underneath the currency, quietly holding this entire multi-trillion-dollar global system together every single day. So let's now genuinely put every single piece of this entire 80-year story back together, one final time, completely, from start to finish.
It genuinely started with Britain's decline, and America emerging from World War II holding half the world's economy and most of its gold. Then came Bretton Woods, pegging every currency to the dollar, and the dollar itself to gold, at $35 per ounce exactly. Then came Nixon's shock in 1971, severing that gold connection completely, leaving the dollar floating freely, backed by absolutely nothing physical at all. Then came the petrodollar deal in 1974, replacing gold with oil and quietly guaranteeing permanent, structural global demand.
SWIFT and the Eurodollar market then quietly built the actual global plumbing, the highways and pipes, that let dollars flow everywhere, constantly, efficiently. Treasury bonds became the world's safest parking spot, letting America run enormous deficits, funded quietly and reliably by the entire rest of the world. SWIFT sanctions then revealed the darker side of this same power, showing genuinely how easily dollar dominance can also become a real geopolitical weapon. That same weapon quietly pushed BRICS, gold buying, and de-dollarization efforts forward, even though genuine, meaningful alternatives still remain fundamentally difficult to build. And underneath every single piece of this entire 80-year machine sits one fragile, invisible foundation: simple, shared, collective global human trust and belief.
So the next time you genuinely hold a dollar bill in your hand, remember it isn't actually backed by gold, or oil, or anything physical. It's genuinely backed by 80 years of history, one broken gold promise, a quiet oil deal, and billions of people simply agreeing to believe.
That belief has genuinely held strong for over 50 straight years now, surviving wars, oil shocks, financial crash.
But belief, by its very nature, is never genuinely permanent or guaranteed. It has to be continuously, actively earned.
Every other empire in genuine recorded history that once controlled the world's money eventually, quietly, lost that same position to someone else, given enough time. Rome had it once. Spain had it once. The Dutch had it once. Britain had it once too, for a genuinely very long time. History genuinely doesn't suggest America's turn will end tomorrow, or even soon. But history does suggest, quietly, that every single turn eventually ends. So the real question was genuinely never simply why the dollar became the world's money. It's how long that trust can actually keep holding. And that answer genuinely isn't decided in Washington, or in any single government building, boardroom, or central bank meeting room anywhere in the world.
It's genuinely decided, quietly, every single day, by billions of ordinary people around the entire world simply choosing to keep believing in it.